God is over everything. So if God tells you to do this, that's your decision. Regardless of what your options look like, regardless of what your decision making tree looks like, if God says it, He rules over everything. So you go with God, you obey. That is your responsible decision if God is telling you to do it. Welcome to the Church Hurt Recovery Podcast with your host, Soneakqua J, where we'll walk through the question, what in the church happened to you? I am a licensed professional counselor in the states of Texas and Ohio, where I work with people dealing with anxiety, depression, and religious trauma, also known as church hurt. But this is not therapy. This is a podcast highlighting social and emotional learning skills and strategies that will help you manage your thoughts, feelings, emotions, decisions, and relationships as it pertains to everyday life, but specifically for the church. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Grab your water and your journal and let's jump in. Welcome back to the Church Hurt Recovery Podcast, where we ask the question, what in the church happened to you? Then we talk about social and emotional learning skills that will help you manage your thoughts, feelings, emotions, relationships, and decisions in everyday life, but specifically in the church. I am your host, Soneakqua J. Welcome back. We are still on the topic of finances, manipulation, money in the church. We are still talking about Sasha's story, which is a real story. If you have missed any of the episodes, go back and watch those, because this episode we are now talking about responsible decision making. So we make decisions every day. Now, whether those decisions are responsible or not, that is the question. And so this part of the SEL scale specifically says responsible decision making, because like I said, we make decisions all the time, every day, but are they responsible decisions? And a lot of the times, this is the biggest part of the issue where we are in our SEL walk or lack of SEL skills. We don't make very good decisions. And if we don't make good decisions, we end up hurting ourselves. And so this is like my favorite part of the scale, even though it's at the end or at the bottom of the scale, you will be able to see all the pieces come together. So let me recap Sasha's story, and then we will go into responsible decision making. So remember, Sasha is a young woman who is still in church, but when this event happened, she was in church, she was doing well, she was in ministry, she was tithing, she was sowing, everything was going well. And then a guest preacher came to her church and did a sermon. And at the end of the sermon, the guest preacher gave basically a call to action that said that if you would sow $1,000 into her ministry, that you would receive a 30, 60, 90-fold return or harvest on your seed. And so Sasha was in the position where she was in the church, she was hearing the sermon or the word, but she did not feel comfortable with what was going on. What happened after that was that her pastor, who she did love and trust, and I say did, I'll tell you about that in a second. She did love and trust. He was the first one to jump up and sow a seed. She guessed of $1,000 because that's what was asked for or requested from the guest preacher. He jumped up, he sowed. He then encouraged his congregation, because it was his congregation. This was a guest preacher coming to his church, which is the church that Sasha attends. So he encouraged his congregation to basically not miss out, to go ahead and sow and to not miss out on this seed or this harvest. And so a lot of the people that Sasha knew, some of the congregation started sewing, and they were excited, and the music shifted and the energy was high, and everybody was running around and doing all the things that we do when we're excited in church. And so as she's seeing this, she's starting to feel compelled to give. She's getting more and more uncomfortable because she doesn't want to give. She doesn't feel right about it. But because her pastor's doing it and other people that she knows are doing it, they're all excited. So she finally goes ahead and reaches into her purse and gets her credit card. She gives the $1,000 on her credit card, which means she did not have the money. This was not her debit card. This was not coming out of her bank account. This was a credit card that she was now charging this $1,000 seed on her credit card. And as she left the church, she didn't really feel comfortable about what she had done, but she did believe that it would happen because of what her pastor said and what she saw other people doing, and because of what the preacher said. The guest preacher was a well-known preacher in the culture, in the community. It was not somebody that specifically that Sasha knew, but she knew who she was, and there was this know, like, and trust factor with this particular preacher. So even though Sasha was uncomfortable with what she had done, she felt safe enough. She believed that what they said would happen because they were well known. Her pastor did it, and all the other people in the church, well, not all, but a lot of the other people in the church seeded and fed into this. So she believed that it would happen. Now, as far as she could tell, she did not receive anything close to that 30, 60, 90 fold return or harvest that was promised. So after this event, Sasha stayed in the church. So it wasn't something that made her feel like she should leave the church, but she stayed in the church, but she stopped giving. She stopped sowing. She stopped ministering. She got out of leader ministry that she was in. And then it started to become that she could not hear her pastor anymore, that she did not trust him anymore. She felt like he was a part of the manipulation. So now she's not being fed, even though she's in the church. She's no longer giving. She's no longer serving in ministry. And then she feels like the only thing her pastor ever talks about now is money. And like I said in the last episode, I don't know that all he's talking about is money, but that's what she hears because she has an offense based on money. And so when money is being spoken about, her ears perk up because she is so offended when it comes to that. I don't know that for sure because I don't attend the same church that Sasha does, but I see often with my clients, whether it's about money or whatever, if you have an offense in a certain area, your mind and your ears perk up to that thing anytime you hear it, even though it may not be in a negative way when you hear it again, because you have a negative feeling toward it. Your thoughts and your feelings are negative toward it. You perk up and you only hear the negative things about it. So I really believe that's what's going on with Sasha. So she is working through some of those things. So we're talking today about responsible decision making. So I want you to hear Sasha's story from fresh ears, where she's already made the decision. But going forward, what Sasha needs to learn is how to make a responsible decision for herself. And I'll always say, if God is the source, if you are hearing from God to do anything, whether it comes to your money or anything else in your life, if you are hearing from God, then you obey, because now you are in alignment. That is your responsible decision. If God has told you to do it, that is a responsible decision. You just obey. If you have not heard from God, then you have to pause. And so what I want to take you guys through is a decision-making process that I work through with my clients. And so it's a process that I use, and it's fairly straightforward. But what it depends on is what the situation is. So for Sasha in this scenario, we are talking about now going back in hindsight for her, and then going for her in the future, how she can make a better decision. How can you make a responsible decision, particularly in this case, as it pertains to your finances and as it pertains to your finances when it comes to the church? So the first part of the decision-making process is, what's the situation? For Sasha, the situation is you're in a service. Everybody around you is giving. You've been asked, there's been a call to action put on the floor about giving a $1,000 seed. So for Sasha in this particular situation, that is the situation. Does she give? Is she in a position to give? So the next thing, when you identify your situation, what is it that you're even trying to figure out? That's what is it that you're even trying to decide on? That's the situation. So once you are clear about your situation, you move to options. What are your options in the situation? Now, at this stage in the decision making process, I don't even want you to think about the consequences or the repercussions or anything good, whatever it is. I only want you to consider, what are all your options? And I do this on paper with my client so that you can look at it. So if you are taking notes, write these things down so that you can look at it on paper. And I will probably give you a link to something where you can go and access my document as well, somewhere in the comments. So if you're writing this down, remember that you need to know what your situation is and you need to be clear about that. And then you need to move to, what are your options? Write down all the options that could be conceivable. What are all the options? So for Sasha, she could give the $1,000 that's on the floor. She could not give. She could just totally not give anything. She could give a different amount. She could give an amount that she is comfortable with. She could get up and walk out. She could ignore the whole thing completely. So there's all these options. And I think most people only feel like they only have two options. You can only give or not give. So that doesn't give you a whole lot of things to decide on if there's only two. Sometimes there really is only two, but that's why I want you to look at all the options that there are before you even look at the consequences or the repercussions or anything that could happen. Because right now you're just doing this on paper. You could be good enough to do it in your head. And on some things, I am very good at doing some decisions in my head, but I'm also a person who still writes things down on paper. And that is what I challenge and work with my clients on doing until you're good enough, till you're comfortable enough at making decisions that you don't really have to look at. Some decisions are easy. Some decisions are more in depth and you really need to take the time. So after you have your options, then you look at the consequences. So if you have 5 options, then you should also have 5 consequences. So let's look at Sasha's situation. If she gives the $1,000, what are the consequences to that? Now, consequences in this situation could be positive or negative. So when you hear consequences, especially when I'm talking about decision making, and especially when I'm talking about it in response to SEL, I want you to think of consequences as being positive or negative. So we probably would use the term outcome. What are your possible outcomes? Consequences is a word that people see as negative. And even though that's the word I typically use, I also will use outcome so that you know that whatever happens with this decision could be positive or negative. So now we're looking at consequences or outcomes. So if you had 5 options, you should have 5 outcomes or 5 consequences. So Sasha, if she gives a $1,000, what will that do? Will that put her bank account in the negative? Would that make her late on her rent? What are the things that would happen for Sasha? And there could be a consequence and an outcome on each option. So if it's not going to put her in the negative, it might be that she does receive the 30, 60, 90 fold return or harvest on her seed. So that is an outcome that is positive. So that could happen. All right. So we're just looking at everything that could potentially happen with all the options that you've chosen. Remember, we're still on paper. So you haven't done anything yet. You're still safe. Okay. And so after you look at all your consequences or your options or outcomes, now you're looking at your options to see what is the best possible outcome for you. Everybody's decision, and this is how you make your decision when you look at the best possible outcome for you. Now, you have to look at this, and this is also between you and God as well. You cannot look at other people all the time to see what they're doing because you don't have access to their bank accounts unless this is your husband or something like that. Then you have a conversation, but you don't have access or you don't have control over somebody else's bank account. So their decision might not be the same thing as your decision. You've got to get out of comparison. You've got to get out of doing things because other people are doing them. $1,000 may be like a drop in the bucket to somebody, but for Sasha, she didn't have it. She had to put it on her credit card. So if you're in that type of situation, you really need to pause and you really need to do this work so you don't make a decision that is going to hurt you rather than help you. And all things aside, I will keep reiterating, God is over everything. So if God tells you to do this, that's your decision. Regardless of what your options look like, regardless of what your decision making tree looks like, if God says it, He rules over everything. So you go with God, you obey. That is your responsible decision if God is telling you to do it. Otherwise, you need to have some kind of decision making process that you use because you cannot be emotional when you are giving. I like to tell my clients that I don't want you to be emotional when you make any kind of decision, even if the decision evokes emotion. Like when it comes to making health decisions for a loved one or different things that could be very emotional. I like to teach my clients how not to be emotional when they make the decision, even though the situation is emotional. There's a difference in that. So with Sasha, we're down to weighing out the consequences so that she can make the best decision for her. So you go back to your options, you look over all your options, then you look over all your consequences and your possible outcomes. So you choose what you're comfortable and confident in because you're looking at those potential outcomes and consequences. If you cannot afford for your bank account to be in the negative, which I don't think anybody really needs, can afford for their bank account to be in the negative. If that's what it's going to do to you, that's not the decision you're probably going to choose, or it's not a responsible decision for you to choose, unless God says for you to do that, because that means He's responsible for handling that and taking care of it and making sure that you're okay by doing that. So you're looking at your outcomes, you're looking at your consequences. And now what I tell my clients typically to do is look at the consequence or the outcome that is going to be the least painful for you. So if it's not going to put your bank account into the negative, move on to your next consequence or outcome. You might get the return, get the seed, get the return on the harvest. That's a good outcome. If you don't, can you look at this seed in a different way? Even if you don't get the 30, 60, 90 that was promised, can you give this seed as unto God and say to God, I'm expecting you to harvest me whatever you've promised me a harvest in, regardless of what the guest preacher promised a harvest in. If you have that conversation with God and He says, yes, I will return this to you in whatever fashion you guys have agreed that it's going to be returned as, good decision, responsible decision. But if you don't have a go ahead from God, and you're just making a decision that could go either way, but either way wouldn't put you in the negative, wouldn't harm you, wouldn't do anything that would make you offended at someone else because you made this decision, would not make you feel manipulated if what they said doesn't come to pass. This is how you then make your decision without the emotion in it, and making a decision that you're comfortable and confident in. So after you know which one is the better choice for you, that's when you act. You go ahead and you make the decision and you act on it. So you make the decision on your paper and in your head, and then you put a plan of action into place. So whatever that plan of action is to be, you put the plan of action into place. And then remember that once you've made a decision, there's basically no coming back from it. Once you've put it into place, there's no coming back from it. Sometimes you need to get it in your head that there's no coming back from it before you do it, because that means you're decided. And so whatever happens, you're okay with it. And so you've made that decision in your mind, and now you're at peace with what you're going to do. So when you act it out, it's not really a big deal. There's no emotion to it. It's just a thing that I've decided to do. And you go about it almost matter of factly. You do expect. So whatever you and God have talked about, you do expect that. Whatever the situation is that you've decided to go on, you do expect that. You always want to be able to expect whatever you've acted on. So you have to be comfortable with whatever that expectation is. So once you've made the decision, you've put it into action. Now, the next part may take some time. This isn't necessarily going to happen immediately, but you do want to go back over your decision and evaluate your decision. Did what you expect to happen happen? Did it go horribly wrong, and all your consequences and all your outcomes, like the worst thing that you thought was going to happen, happened, or some other random thing that you didn't even think about as a consequence or an outcome happened? So when you evaluate, you're not only evaluating the outcome or the consequence, you're evaluating your process. When you put down your options, was the outcome even an option that you had? Or were you just wrong? Were all your consequences and outcomes on your paper? Or did you just go completely left and something was not there? So you want to evaluate your own process and what happened so that you know how to tweak it. Even if you're wrong, it doesn't mean that you can never make a good, responsible decision. It just means you need to tweak your process. So you always want to evaluate. You want to look at, were you satisfied with your outcome? Were you unsatisfied with your outcome? Were you with your outcome? That just means you need to tweak it, because this same situation may present itself again. And so you want to be as prepared as possible for the next time this situation happens, or any other situation. You are learning a process of decision making, and you want to tweak. Maybe your outcome was fantastic. So the next time you get in this position, you double down if you're in that type of position. Now, for Sasha's position, you would not double down because she did not make a responsible decision. And this is not about beating Sasha up about the decision that she made because she was emotional when she did it. This is not about that. This is not about beating up Sasha's pastor or the guest preacher or anything like that, because like I've said before, The pastor and the guest preacher and other people may have seen the return that was promised. It was just that Sasha didn't see it because that call to action wasn't really for Sasha. She went with it because other people were doing it. So you have got to learn how to make decisions not based off of other people, but based off of what you and God have talked about, or what you have worked out through your own decision-making process, and that you've made a decision that you're okay with standing by and sticking with. So we're finishing, this is the last part of the SEL process as we're talking about finances, money, and manipulation in the church. So if we recap this a little bit, self-awareness, you have got to know what is going on in your own mind and what in your own head when it comes to your finances. You cannot be run by other people. Self-management. So when you know, hey, I only have $100. That's my seed. That's the thing that I'm going to be able to give. No matter what they say, my offering, my seed is $100. Self-management tells you, hey, that's what you have. That's what you do. Unless God has changed something up and adjusted something for you, that is what you're doing. So social awareness would be the next step. So no matter what, I don't care if they are running around the church and doing backflips off the pulpit. If you don't have a different word from God, you stay. You play the play that you're playing, you stay. You don't put any more into it, even though your social environment is going bananas. That doesn't mean anything to you. That doesn't move you in this scenario. Your relationship skills, remember, your relationship to God is first, and then allowing Him to lead you to the other people that you are to be able to trust. And remember, you have to build trust with these people in order to even hear the words that they are saying. If you just went to a church and you're like, it's random and you just met these people, pause unless you're hearing from God, because you don't have a relationship here yet. Think about that. All right. And then our final step, which is the big one, is responsible decision making. We just went through that. Your biggest responsible decision making is what God said. If God says give $1,000, you obey. That is your responsible decision. If that is not what God says, then you might need to go through your decision making process. If you're not hearing God because you've got all these other things going on, go through your decision making process. If you have somebody who you know is connected to God and they might be able to hear for you, you can ask, but you still want to make sure that you are now making a decision that you can live with, that you can be comfortable and confident in, no matter what anybody else is saying. So we have just scaled our entire SEL scale as it pertains to money, finances, and manipulation and other things regarding finances in the church. So our next episodes are going to be completely different, and I will be back soon with some of those things that we're going to keep talking about. Our SE scale is prevalent. So that is always going to be our end goal, is for you to be able to scale your own SEL and then to help other people do it as well. Now we've gone through this scenario, and like I always say, not everybody will need therapy over something that has to do with money and finances and manipulation. Your SEL scale may be able to get you the tools that you need to handle these things. But this podcast does not take the place of getting professional help. If you need a coach, if you need therapy, go ahead and do that. I'll be back soon with more on our SEL scale in a different framework. Until then, be proactive about your mental health. Be well, and God bless. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Church Hurt Recovery Podcast. I hope you've learned something, and if you did, please remember to subscribe. Also, remember that this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not take the place of therapy. So if you need professional assistance, please seek that out. Until we meet again, be proactive about your mental health, be well, and God bless.